In December 2002, in rural Arkansas, 13-year-old Kacie Woody disappeared from her home after months of talking online to someone she believed was a teenage boy. He called himself Dave Fagan, used a young profile photo, spoke to her constantly, and built enough trust to move from chat messages to phone calls and real-world contact. On the night she vanished, her online conversation stopped suddenly. Her glasses were left behind, the family computer was still open, and the scene suggested she had been taken quickly. At first, investigators had only fragments, screen names, phone numbers, and a digital trail leading to people Kacie thought she knew. One of those identities was real and was cleared, but the other led detectives to a man who had come to Arkansas under a false persona and was already moving through the area. That trail led from chat rooms to a motel, from a motel to a rental minivan, and from the minivan to a storage unit in Conway. Inside that unit, investigators found the ending of the case: Kacie's body, the predator who had taken her, and the proof that the entire crime had been built on a fake online identity. This is the story of how an invented profile, a digital trail, and a rapidly tightening timeline exposed the man who had been hiding behind the screen.
In December 2002, in Holland, Arkansas, 13-year-old Kacie Woody was living a routine life, attending school and spending time online using the family computer. She regularly used early messaging platforms, where she communicated with people she believed were her peers. Over time, she began speaking with someone she introduced herself as a teenage boy named Dave Fagan. The interaction continued for weeks, gradually increasing in frequency and familiarity through chats and phone conversations. The individual gained her trust by maintaining a consistent identity and aligning his behavior with someone her age. This created a relationship that appeared normal from her perspective, without any visible signs of deception. On the day of her disappearance, there were no indications that anything unusual was about to occur. She was last known to be at home, using the computer in her room during the evening. The communication with the same online identity continued up to the point where her activity suddenly stopped. This was the last normal moment, where an online interaction transitioned into a real-world event without immediate warning. On the night of December 3, 2002, Kacie was at home using the computer when her communication with the same online identity continued into the evening. At some point during that interaction, she left the room and her activity stopped abruptly, without any follow-up messages. When her family checked, her glasses were still on the desk, the computer was still on, and there was no indication that she had left voluntarily. The absence of her glasses suggested that she had not planned to go anywhere, reinforcing the idea of a sudden interruption. There were no signs of forced entry or disturbance in the house, indicating that whoever took her had done so quickly and without creating noise. This created a confined timeline where the event occurred within a very short window inside the home. The situation escalated immediately from a missing person to a suspected abduction based on the condition of the scene. Law enforcement was contacted, and the house became the primary location for initial investigation. This marked the point of no return, where a controlled online interaction transitioned into a real-world disappearance. From that moment, the case depended on reconstructing the digital trail that led to that night. Once the disappearance was confirmed, investigators focused on the computer as the central point of evidence, since it was the last place Kacie had been active. The chat records revealed multiple online identities she had been communicating with, creating several possible leads. One of those identities belonged to a real teenage boy,
who was quickly identified and cleared after verification. This narrowed the investigation to the second identity, the one using the name Dave Fagan, which showed consistent and frequent communication with Kacie. Investigators began tracing this identity through usernames, email links, and associated phone numbers. The digital trail extended beyond simple chat logs, including call records that connected the online identity to real-world communication. This created the first clear direction in the case, shifting focus from unknown abduction to a targeted individual behind the screen. Investigators worked to identify the person controlling the identity, but initial information suggested that the profile details were fabricated. The challenge became separating what was real from what had been constructed to mislead. At this stage, the investigation was defined by one objective: to trace a false identity back to a real person. As investigators focused on the identity Dave Fagan, they began tracing the digital and phone records connected to the account. The phone number used in the communication did not belong to a teenage user, but was linked to an adult male, creating the first clear contradiction. Records showed that this individual had traveled into Arkansas around the same time Kacie disappeared, placing him within range of her location. Further investigation revealed that he had checked into a local motel shortly before the abduction, establishing a physical presence in the area. This formed a critical lead, connecting the online identity to a real individual who had moved from digital contact to physical proximity. Investigators identified the man as David Fuller, who had used the fake identity to gain Kacie's trust over an extended period. The timeline now showed a progression from online communication to real-world contact. This shifted the case from an unknown abduction to a targeted crime carried out by someone who had deliberately entered the area. The digital trail and travel records aligned, creating a continuous sequence from the computer to the suspect's movements. At this point, the investigation had moved from identifying a false identity to locating the person behind it. With the suspect identified and located in the area, investigators moved quickly to track his movements in real time. Records showed that after checking into the motel, he had rented a minivan, adding another layer to the timeline. This created a new lead, focusing on the vehicle as a mobile link between locations connected to the crime. The rental records provided exact timestamps, allowing investigators to reconstruct his movements after Kacie disappeared. Surveillance and transaction data indicated that he had traveled between the motel and other nearby locations without a clear explanation. Investigators expanded the search to include properties and storage facilities that could be connected to his movements. This led them to a storage unit in Conway, which matched the timeline and location pattern identified through the records. The sequence now showed a progression from online contact to physical arrival and then to movement between controlled locations. Unlike earlier leads, this direction was supported by consistent and verifiable data points. At this stage, the investigation had narrowed from multiple possibilities to a single path that connected the suspect to a specific location. Investigators obtained access to the storage unit identified through the suspect's movement records, treating it as a critical location in the timeline. When the unit was opened, they found evidence that confirmed the worst outcome, establishing that Kacie had been taken there after the abduction. Inside the same storage unit, her body was recovered, providing the first direct confirmation of what had happened. This shifted the case from reconstruction to confirmation, linking the digital trail to a physical location where the crime had ended. The storage unit became the central crime scene, connecting the suspect's movements, the rental vehicle, and the timeline of the disappearance. Evidence collected inside the unit matched the sequence investigators had built from digital and transactional data. This confirmed that the suspect had used multiple controlled locations to carry out and conceal the crime. The investigation now had a complete path, from online identity to physical abduction to transportation and finally to the storage unit. Unlike earlier uncertainty, every stage of the sequence was now supported by evidence. The digital trail had not only identified the suspect, but had led directly to the location where the case was resolved. With the storage unit confirming the outcome, investigators moved to arrest David Fuller, who had created the false identity used to contact Kacie. The case established that he had deliberately posed as a teenage boy over an extended period to gain her trust and arrange real-world contact. His motive was based on targeted online grooming, where the identity was used to control communication and plan the abduction. The timeline showed a clear sequence: online interaction, physical arrival, abduction, and movement between controlled locations. During the investigation, Fuller did not provide a version of events that could contradict the evidence collected against him. The digital records, phone data, rental agreements, and physical evidence formed a complete and consistent account of the crime. There was no uncertainty about how the crime was carried out or who was responsible, as each step was supported by verifiable data. He was later found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot before trial, preventing a full courtroom resolution. Despite this, the case was fully established through the evidence, leaving no unresolved questions about responsibility. What began as an online conversation ended as a fully reconstructed crime, solved by a digital identity that led investigators from a screen to the exact location where the case was resolved.